Hello there, guys. So I'm going to show you all how to touch other people's physics in VRChat, as long as the avatars are both made to do it. So what you need to do is, before we even work on the avatar itself, which for this example I have just a basic avatar here with just physics on the tail for now, using dynamic bones, which this tutorial will not explain how to do, as it assumes you already know the step needed for that. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to create a capsule, and then I'm going to center it in the middle of the world so I can position it correctly. So I'm going to put that here, and then I'm going to shrink it a good bit. All right, and then I'm going to also make a second capsule. Because of the shape of the tail, it's going to be better to have it as a capsule as well. So I'm going to copy this. Actually, you know what? I'll just delete this, copy this. That way, I can just move this down. Now make sure both the top and bottom capsules are pretty much touching each other. And now I'm going to increase the size of this one, and then the length, so that it's going to be kind of the same size as the tail. So now here's where the tricky part happens. So I'm going to name the top capsule Hinge. I'm going to name the bottom capsule Tail Touch. I'm going to create an empty game object and name that Tail Touch as well. I'm going to put the shapes inside the game object so they're able to be moved around as a single object. Now once you've put everything into the game object, you're going to want to click on Hinge and add a rigid body, disable gravity, and enable kinematic. What that'll do is it'll keep the object from falling or moving in the world and or whatever object it's in. As for the tail touch, we're going to add something called a hinge joint. And we're going to disable the gravity on the rigid body in this one. Is actually, I believe we keep that because it doesn't matter, as it's going to be connected to the hinge. So I'm going to drag the hinge onto the connected body element of the hinge joint. Now once you do that, it'll automatically configure the anchor point and attach it right here. And in the hinge joint, it's best to turn on use limits, to my experience so far. I'm sure there's going to be better setups discovered during this, but so far I've discovered that just using free spin in the default settings seems to work best. So I'm going to enter play mode now. Currently I have the mesh renderer disabled so that the mesh actually isn't visible, but the collider still exists. So let me move that over here. I'm going to move it down like this so that when I move this towards the object, you can see it colliding. For some reason, it's not being very accurate right now. It's probably because the object's way too big. Yeah, as you can see, it's moving the object. What this is going to allow is, if you click on the object itself, you can actually add a dynamic collider to what you just saw moving. And so what I'm going to do now is, so I added a dynamic collider, and now I'm going to set its height to, let's see, whatever, yeah, so I'm changing its height so that, as you see, it's actually expanding the size of the dynamic colliding capsule. I'm going to make it pretty much the same as the one that's attached to it right now. Then I'm going to change the bound to inside so that it's purple. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to attach this dynamic bone collider and I'm going to be able to attach it as a collider to the dynamic bones here. So now I'm going to move this game object into the hip of the avatar so that it's actually inside there, and then I'm going to click on the game object, center it, actually let me move it outside of the object first, then center it. Alright, now I'm going to put the tail object inside the hip bone of the avatar and move it into place. So, let me see here. If I drag it over here, looks about right, centered wise, and then I'm going to rotate it so that it's connected to the tail. So here's where it gets a little tricky. So basically the idea is, if you see here, you see all those white radiuses? Those radiuses are, on the dynamic bone, what the colliders collide with when you touch them. So I'm going to make those a tiny bit bigger. And then I'm going to remove this. Actually, it might be better if I keep it so they get progressively bigger. So, but now what you want to do is you want to make sure that within the confines of the purple collider, which is an inside-out collider, everything that's part of the tail is inside there. What this will do is when the collider hits this object, it'll actually move the tail because it's inside of the collider. It won't let something leave the inside of that collider. So it's the opposite of what you're usually using it for. So now I'm going to test it. Now to really get a good view, I'm going to select both objects here and disable the mesh renderer so that it's completely visible for us. Now there's a good chance that when we enter play mode, the tail is going to collapse or rip off, and it's usually because the colliders are not encapsulating the tail correctly, and there's something on the outside of it. So let's do that now. All right, so it seems that everything's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that cube from earlier and touch this cube with it. And as you saw, it moves the tail because it's colliding with it. Sometimes it's finicky. Oh, there you go. So as it's moving the capsule from before, in fact, if I enter debug mode, I believe it shows, yeah, the collision. So you see it's doing this. Of course, it's having a great old time. I might be able to improve the collision by adding a RigidBody to the collider here. So give me a sec. Got to make that kinematic and remove gravity. Reset the object. There we go. See, now that's reacting much better because it's a rigid body. So, as you see, it's moving the tail perfectly fine. Now, in-game, of course, our avatars do not have a collider in the hands. So the way to solve that is you go and add to the middle finger or the wrist or whatever you feel comfortable doing, just like you would any other collider, but instead of adding a dynamic collider, you're going to add a capsule collider or box collider, whatever works best for you and the shape of your avatar. So now I'm going to figure out basically the best settings for that. Now this, however, I recommend making it a gesture so that you can enable the collider on your hands so that they're not on permanently, because it does cause problems, such as if you pick up an object, that object will shoot out of your hand because your hand's colliding with the object. Or if you touch your hip bone, it'll shoot you into the sky, and that's also not good. So I'm almost done here with this collider. Let's make it a little bit shorter, and there you go. So that's going to be what, if I upload this avatar for two people, what can happen is they can touch each other's tails, basically. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to add a rigid body, though, to the hand and make it have no gravity. That'll make it so that the hand interacts better with the other colliders, as you saw earlier in the demonstration. So now I'm going to go to the left shoulder and just quickly add this collider to this hand as well, paste in new, as well as a rigid body. Make sure to turn off the gravity. All right, so now if I enter play mode again, now, of course, I'm about to show you, I'm going to drag her hand so that I can touch her tail with the hand. Now, obviously, you're going to see it stretching off, but it's basically just to give you a demonstration of, yeah, you can now see that collider hitting the tail. It's floating away, however, just because of the rigid body on it. That gets overridden in VRChat because your character is controlled by an animator, so you don't have to worry about that in game. Plus, you're not going to be touching your own physics. That's why I recommend the gesture enabling part of it. And then so that should be it. I could show video of this working in game. So let me switch over to VR and I'll do that now. All right, so guys, I just got in game, and as you saw, I uploaded the avatar with the tail physics as well as the colliders in the hand. So my friend Tails here, who is named rather appropriate considering, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you that now that I'm in game, I can touch his tail because I'm actually hitting the collider with my other collider, not actually touching his dynamic bones. So that allows it to be touched in game because you're actually touching something else that is touching him, not actually touching him. Now, I'm also going to explain that there's some drawbacks to this, unfortunately. Now, I quickly made this, so that means that the collider in the tail and stuff is a little too big. So what's happening is if I jump, I'm colliding with my tail, causing me to float momentarily until the joint goes back into place. Now, that's one reason why I suggested adding the ability to disable them on a gesture and enable them, if that makes sense. And then another drawback is if you pick up objects with the colliders in your hands, you'll see that I go to touch them and they shoot out of my hand because they're colliding with my hand. So if I go downstairs here to the bar, once I'm here, you'll notice that I could just go to the Coke shelf and just hit everything off the shelf because they all have colliders. But those are just some of the drawbacks. The last one I've noticed is sometimes when you teleport in a world, because of the use of rigid bodies, your character's rigid body will stay where you teleported from, causing the object on your body to get stretched. And the only way to reset it seems to be to change worlds so far. But yeah, I believe that's it. I'm probably going to do another tutorial on how to add breathing animations to your avatar next. So keep on a lookout for that.